reporting on the games you love by people who love to game. The MMO Reporter Network.
Now, since we're going to be talking a lot about how video games get made, things are going to get a little bit technical. Hopefully they're going to be really interesting. You're probably going to have some questions. We'll do some Q&A at the end, but if there's not enough time for a question, come find us afterwards. We love to talk about making games.
So this is Genesis. It's a proprietary tool that we built in-house in order to create the beautiful landscapes that you can see all throughout Nexus.
So I'm a programmer at Carbine, and one of the very first things I started doing when I started working at Carbine was working on this tool, Genesis. We knew really early on that to make a big, massive world involves complex tools that can create content quickly, easily, rapidly, and that's sort of the idea behind Genesis. Let our world artists make Wildstar quickly.
So today we're taking a peek at one of our early Dominion zones. It's called Levian Bay. And I'm just going to jump right in here because Genesis is super easy to use. Right away, I'm going to start raising height on the terrain, taking it back down, smoothing it out when I need to. And if that looks terrible, then I'm just going to flatten it all.
So Genesis is a terrain editor at heart. What is a terrain editor? If you were to think about the entire world of Nexus as one gigantic black and white image, with black being the furthest down on the ground and white being the highest up in the air, that's really what we're doing here. Christy's just changing the brightness of that image, and we then interpolate what's going on to make this awesome looking terrain. So, one of the neat things here is that this terrain actually is really low resolution. The entire world of Nexus, actually Levian Bay here is this small little zone that people start off in, but the idea is that we can support really, really big maps. Genesis edits maps up to about 64 kilometers square. That ends up being a lot of data. So we actually have to break the world up into these tiny little pieces that you see up here. We call them chunks. Chunks are about 32 meters square, and if you think about 64 kilometers long by 64 kilometers big, at 32 meters each, that's like 2,000 by 2,000. It's about 4 million chunks. That's a lot of data. So we're really trying to keep that height map that Chris is painting as low resolution as possible. We actually only store a height value every 2 meters. And that's about the height of a character in Wildstar. Now, even though we're actually only storing a value every 2 meters, that's not how we want to draw things. We generally want things to look really nice and have a lot more fidelity than what we're going to store. So what we do is we try to come up with some way to interpolate a value in between them. If you think about those crime scene investigation shows, CSI, things like that, they've got like a license plate off in the distance and it's really hard to read, but then they'll enhance and enhance. That's kind of what we're doing. What Christy's doing is as she's painting 4 individual heights that she's setting up, we need to come up with a value that's set in the middle. And that value in the middle, we're trying to reduce the amount of stair stepping that's going to happen. And that would be like a jagged edge along that cliff face. So hopefully we can do something with like some sharp edges, maybe show this off. So here you can kind of see that at work. Chrissy, can you turn on the land edges real quick, or is that going to be too hard?
All the exciting back ends here.
So it's kind of really hard to see on this big screen, but basically for every those 4 squares, we're picking up an extra spot in the middle. Now, we don't just want an average there, because an average is just going to make everything look the same. We really do want to try to reduce the amount of sharp things. It gives everything that smooth sort of look.
So now that we've got some terrain painted here, I'm going to start adding in some texture. I really like texture. It gives a lot of life to Nexus here. You can see it's sort of painting down this grass, or this sand, words are hard. And it really blends in very nicely with the existing grass texture we've got. So you can actually see the grass will come up on top of it and sort of blend together. And one of my favorite things that we have in Genesis is called Clutter variations. So right now the sand is sort of plain, but we can actually add extra geometry on top of it. These little plants here, we can add extra grass on the edges to sort of blend it even more. We can even add some seashells.
So So Clutter's really neat. What Clutter is it's just this really low-cost geometry that we are allowed to sort of rapidly and randomly place on top of the terrain, wherever Kristen decides to paint. There's some downsides to Clutter. The artist who has to make it, they're limited to using a small amount of geometry and only one texture for the entire Clutter set. But it's cool because they'll be able to use up to 4 Clutter sets per terrain texture. So we get to add a lot of different little visual variation in what's going on. Another kind of neat thing, which isn't showing itself off too well here, is that Clutter also picks up our wind weighting. So in a gusty zone like Dallas that you might have seen, you'll see sort of you'll see a breeze. Here you can only gently see the wind sort of pushing things around.
We've also got some really cool constructed textures too. So I'm going to drop in some metal plate here, because the Dominion like to just roll into a forest and flatten everything for fun. And we've got these cool things called height maps, and you can sort of see them, just an example here. I'm going to paint in these individual metal plates.
So what we do with our terrain textures is when a texture artist actually makes them, they're not just setting the color of them, what it looks like, but they're also setting the height of it, literally at each pixel. And that lets us do neat things like layer them on top of one another. Here Christy's able to paint in these sort of grates and these other plates, and they come up on top of things. We do other sort of neat things like roots that'll sort of come up on top of dirt. In fact, we do neat things too where we can put grass or snow inside of cracks. Is there some crack on that mountain you could put some stuff in? Yes, will you fill in that crack?
Yes.
So hopefully here Christy will show some grass filling in these little cracks along here. So the neat thing here is that it makes it so the artist can more rapidly put things together. They don't have to worry about how something is going to blend. Somebody who set up the texture for them already knows what height they're looking for. And it sort of puts it together, they sort of slap it all in, and they worry about the detail later.
So another one of my favorite features in Genesis is what we call vertex color. You may notice that Nexus looks very hand-painted in lots of different colors. I can actually take almost any color I want and just start painting it directly onto the terrain.
Now, Christy can't really pick any color. Vertex Color is a 16-bit color channel, so she really only has 65,500 some odd colors to pick from.
Like I said, almost any color. You can see it goes down really nicely here. You can just sort of blend colors together and paint special shapes and all sorts of fun stuff. We get some really nice gradients throughout the landscape.
Time to talk about some designer color. So, do people here know what gray boxing is? Anybody heard of gray boxing? So, gray boxing is this idea that before we actually go and finish artifying a level, we want our design teams to come in and lay down some basic things. At the time that they go in and lay those things down, everything's empty. There's no terrain, there's no trees, there's no props, there's no nothing. Everything's flat textured, it just looks like a gray box. Now, at this point, what the designers like to do is they'll draw on the world using that vertex color layer. They'll put up a little circle and say, hey, I want this creature to be here. They'll draw some trees and say, hey, can somebody populate this thing up like this? Let's build a road going this way. They design out the level with the vertex color. And that's really cool. They do all these kinds of things. So then after they do that, the artist will come through. They'll raise and lower the terrain like Christy did. They'll put in some texture. They'll paint on top of that vertex color layer. And then all that data just sort of disappears. And that kind of sucked. So what ended up happening is our designers would come to us and say, hey, can you have a separate color layer that we can put things in? And so we gave it to them. And so now there's an awesome vertex color layer that you guys get to see that's beautiful, and an awesome one that Carbine employees get to see, filled with notes and doodles and very inappropriate jokes. We do love Pappy.
So in addition to some of the cool color stuff that we can do, we also have these things called brushes, and I can actually use different brush tips to get different effects here. The one I just picked is sort of a soft sort of watercolor brush, so it sort of comes in nice and little fuzzy edge. And I can also do things like grab this spotted brush here, and then just stamp down shapes.
So this giant world is actually streamed to you chunk by chunk. You end up downloading it with the patcher beforehand, but each thing is sort of loaded in one at a time in memory. That's the idea of a chunk, is that it's a really small piece of data that your computer can quickly load without having to stream anything. So So we try to minimize the number of load screens. In fact, when you're on a giant continent of Wild in Nexus, there are no load screens. If you're on, you can run from one end to the other end without a load screen. We do have some instances and other dungeon-like content where you will go through a little load screen, but for the most part, everything's sort of just streamed up to your video card, chunk by chunk. One more question.
I wasn't sure if you answered this earlier.
Yeah, so Genesis is the tool that we use for making literally just about everything in Wildstar. Our content design people actually put all creatures in there. It's a lot less exciting to watch them put down creatures. It's a bunch of little dots and things like that. When someone's doing like a dungeon and things like that, they can use the terrain. They also put down gigantic interiors, kind of like that cave that Chrissy was showing. Chrissy, do you want to put down like a big cave and sort of show it in there? But yeah, they use Genesis to prop and place all those sorts of things, to put down creatures. Genesis is the main tool. I want to say a good half, maybe 2/3 of the company actually use it. Let's get another one in here.
When you place NPCs on this, does it like give you the option for like
So NPCs are actually created in another tool that we call our creature editor. That's where an NPC gets its name, they decide what art it's going to have, they set all the stats for it and things like that. But once it's set up in that creature editor, there's actually a mode in Genesis which will actually draw them on there so that people can see scales and tell what's going on. Definitely there's a lot of variation in terms of height and stats that are going to be on monsters, so there is a lot of randomization for NPCs that you're going to be looking at. Well, thank you guys very much. It's a lot of fun. Hope you guys enjoyed watching how we make the wonderful world of Wildstar.